Welcome to the Tea Mind, and for those of you that are new around here, I'm Erica, and this is the podcast where we pause, put the kettle on, and reconnect with what really matters. Each episode is your invitation to slow down and explore how something as simple as a cup of tea can become a gateway to mindfulness, mental fitness, and a more present way of living. We will sip our way through practical tea routines, powerful insights, and heartfelt stories. Some weeks it's just you and me, and some weeks we'll hear from inspiring guests. But every week it's a chance to recalibrate, to pause, rebalance, and thrive. So grab your favourite mug, breathe deeply, and join me in the art of living with a tea mind. Okay. So, welcome to this episode of the Tea Mind podcast. And what does it take to build something meaningful in a noisy world? Well, today's guest has answered that question, not with slogans, but with stillness. Simon Erlanger is the managing director of Isle of Harris Distillers, a business born on the edge of Scotland and rooted deeply in purpose. A place where the making of spirit is more than production. It's a ritual, patience, people, and pride. And under Simon's guidance, the Isle of Harris gin, and now the Herach whisky, has become much more than a drink. It's really become a symbol of connection, of craft, and of community regeneration, which is so vital to Harris. And it shows us what happens when you slow down, listen deeply, and build from the soul outward. So, in this episode, I'll be chatting with Simon, not just to talk about business, but to explore what it means to create with care and to lead with integrity and to build legacy through presence. So, this conversation has a more personal meaning to me too, as my mum was born and brought up in Harris, and I've enjoyed many summers and holidays there. And in fact, it was one Christmas way back in, I think it was 2015, when I shared some Harris gin with my mum, that the idea for the Etiquette Isle of Harris gin tea was born. And Simon was more than happy to meet with me and very kindly let me experiment with all his botanicals. So the tea and the gin have been going great guns ever since. So I invite you to pour a cup of tea or something stronger, and we're going to explore how pausing, purpose, and a touch of Hebridean magic can teach us something about living well and leading better. Welcome to the podcast, Simon.
Thank you, Erica. Lovely to be here.
So, yeah, do you want to just start by maybe telling us a little bit more about your background and how you came to be where you are now?
Okay. So, yeah, I think this is actually my 40th year in the whiskey industry. Would you believe it? I think the word veteran might actually apply. So, yes, I joined Johnny Walker and Scotch whiskey back in the mid 1980s. When it was still part of a huge conglomerate called DCL. And I was based in London at the time. And I was responsible for a number of European markets at that point. I did a degree in languages and I always loved traveling and exploring new cultures. And so I had a wonderful job traveling around Italy and Greece and Yugoslavia and France, marketing Johnny Walker. And that evolved into a different business that got bought by Guinness and became what is now called Diageo, which is obviously still the biggest spirits company in the world. And as part of that transformation, I relocated to Switzerland for a few years, where I ran the sales and marketing departments of our newly bought subsidiary. Got married. Our first son was born in near Lausanne, looking over Lake Geneva. Wonderful time. And then I got headhunted to Scotland. I'm not, as you can probably hear, from Scotland, but got headhunted to Glenmorangie, where I came to Edinburgh in 1993 with my first child, second child on the way. And we started living here, and the rest is history. We've been here ever since and brought up our three sons here. Spent 15 wonderful years with Glenmorangie, global sales and marketing director. So spent most of my life on a plane doing what I love doing, which is out there building premium brands with different consumers and managing that kind of whole marketing mix to generate profitable sales. So we did that. We sold the company to Moet Hennessy, LVMH, back in 2005. I stayed for 3 years to help with the integration of the businesses. relaunched the Glenmorangie brand, and then I left. Decided to go solo. So I set up my own little consulting business, helping startups, mainly in the spirits industry, with strategy, route to market, distribution, product development, that sort of thing. And was thoroughly enjoying being self-employed. That was a lot of fun. And I got a call out of the blue from a headhunter who said that he'd been given this rather eccentric brief. And there was a gentleman who wanted to build the first whiskey distillery on the Isle of Harris. And that he wanted to do so not because he was a businessman or had this particular passion for whiskey, but he thought this might be a great way to stem the 50 years of population decline that had been happening. So the Isle of Harris, you might not know, out in the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides, now home to less than 2,000 people, where it was 4,000 50 years ago. And so Anderson Bakewell, his name is, a wonderful gentleman, very, very strongly connected to Harris, wanted to do something about it. And so building a whiskey distillery, he thought, might be the answer, because distilleries tend to last for generations. They're not here today, gone tomorrow. And his other kind of romantic vision was, could you somehow capture the essence of this beautiful island in a bottle and send the message of Harris out to the wider world, and therefore not just employ some people and a distillery, but actually act as a catalyst for wider economic regeneration, bringing more tourists to the island. So wonderful idea, obviously caught my imagination. I thought, I have to do this. This is the most exciting thing I think I will ever have the opportunity to do. And that was 14 years ago. And so it has proved to be.
Wow. Yes, it certainly has. And can you take me back to the first moment that you set foot in Harris? And yeah, what was that like?
Oh yeah, that was great. Burr, his Anderson Bakewell, he's known as Burr. He met me in his Mark II Defender, and we drove around the island in silence, actually, for about 3 hours. And it was my first visit to the island. I knew the Western Isle, I knew the west coast of Scotland very well, but I'd never been that far out, like 99% of the world. But yeah, I mean, it's so hard to describe if you haven't been there. Erica, you will describe it better than I do because you've got such close connection. But there's something elemental about Harris, and it's a word we actually use a lot now. It's the extraordinary contrasts from the beautiful turquoise seas and white sand of the west coast, and then you go 5 miles to the east, and it's barren lunar landscapes, and the weather is the same, from 1 minute to the next. You'll change seasons, and so it's this extraordinary island of contrast: mountains, valleys, lakes, sea, and I think what most struck me, and it wasn't just that first visit, but what's most struck me about Harris actually is more than the place; it's the people. I think they are literally the most special people I've ever come across, and I guess we could talk about that a little bit, because there's something they have, which I think we could probably all do with a little bit in our lives.
Yes, I wonder what it is that they have that makes them special. And I know from my mum, wherever she is, she'll always find another Paris connection, and it's like magnets, they're drawn to each other. I don't know what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it. And obviously, a lot of it comes from, living in what is really a pretty harsh climate. There's very little arable land. It's mainly peat and rock. It's the weather, as I say, terribly unpredictable. And so over time, they've lived a pretty tough life. And I think what they have developed, and I was trying to summarize it as two things, I think, that stand out for me. One is this incredible sense of belonging to each other, a sense of community. Someone said to me, people look out for each other on Harris. I thought that struck with me. And there's no crime, nobody locks their doors. People go away on holiday for 2 weeks with the keys in the ignition. And it's a lovely, safe place, and people look out for each other. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that comes from working in quite a tough place is resilience and an ability to adapt. So you have to adapt. The ferries might or might not sail. You might or might not be able to put your washing out. You might not be able to bring the sheep into the fank for shearing. So resilience and adaptability, I think, are the other real strength that I found working with the Herach people of Harris.
And how have you sort of incorporated that into the distillery itself and to the brand and to the operations and how you
Yeah.
lead the operation as well?
Well, one thing I'm most proud of actually is right at the outset, before we'd even raised the money for the distillery, is we established what our purpose and our values were. And they're very simple. There's not much to it. There are five values that we live by, but and a very clear purpose. And I've kind of described our purpose really. But the values emanate from the dream of the founder and his values and the people. So one of our values is for, with, and from the Isle of Harris. So everything we do needs to be supportive of Harris. It needs to fit with Harris. It mustn't jar with the Harris culture and the Harris way of doing things. So we won't open on a Sunday. There's one example, so we have to shut everything down, our whole operations, and the beautiful thing about that is our whiskey gets an extra day to ferment. So there's a lovely side benefit of that constraint. And another of our values is nurturing belonging. So I talked about belonging a second ago. And so nurturing belonging, it's a little bit like spreading that wonderful Harris thing to the world. So we in our storytelling, what other people would call marketing, we call storytelling. It's all about creating a sense of belonging to the island with our consumers, with our stakeholders, with our bankers, every supplier to the business. We want them to have a sense of belonging to the company. And that's, for hard material reason. That means they'll get out of bed more for us than they might do for others. They can't do that for the money because we're so small. But, having that sense of emotional connection to what we do, building that. And that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And I think that's created brand loyalty as well, which is, again, the hard benefit of that value. I could go on, but that it's that foundation stone, these values, which we then use day to day in every decision we make. We build them into our personal development plans, so every team member is evaluated against how they work the values. And some of them, are shown off as exemplars of a particular value. And for others, we work on certain elements of the values. Say, look, if you could do a little bit more of this, and so we have this fantastic cohesion in the team, and we have people crossing departments, daily to help each other out, which in my previous life would kind of never have happened, where you're always fighting silos in the organization. And my big dream is I will leave the business one day and there still won't be any silos. People will still muck in and help each other out wherever they're needed.
I just think it's remarkable how the business has managed to distill those values day in, day out through every single person that you interact with as well. And your whole storytelling is an absolute masterclass. Everything you do is just amazing.
Thank
And I
you.
think when you sit with whether it's a gin or a whiskey, it's not just it's much more than just a gin or a whiskey. You are transported there, and all the work that you do, everything leads to that moment, I
Mm.
think, which is what makes it so special.
Well, that's
And
lovely to hear, Erica, that you say that from a dispassionate, objective perspective, because that is exactly what we're trying to do. Again, from a very hard-nosed commercial base, I always think I'm trying to develop a brand or brands in incredibly crowded categories where there are far too many gins and far too many single malt whiskies. They don't need any more. So what we have to do is carve out our niche and really provide an inspiring point of difference for the consumer, so that they actually want to pick our product off the shelf or in the bar rather than somebody else's.
I think the fact that you've got a real purpose behind it as well, and it's benefiting not just the business, but the community and everybody that works there as well. And I really love the whole you do Kayleys as well and soundscapes and things which just bring it all together. Just I love that.
Well, we're trying to translate as much of island culture as we can. And we like the idea of a ceilidh because a ceilidh gets misconstrued these days into, a sort of line dance with kilts and pipes. Whereas, that a ceilidh is simply a get together. It's going around to your neighbor's house. You might have a fiddle, you might not, you might just tell stories and you might have a dram, you might or might not have anything to eat, but it's all about community. It's about meeting up. People don't tend to go to the pub. They tend to go to each other's homes for conviviality. So that's the original meaning of ceilidh, and that represents this idea of belonging that we're so focused on.
And I've got to ask about the Dotach, which is who your still is named after.
I never met the Dotach. This was again our founder's idea because Burr used to. Well, he does. He owns a small island off Harris called Scarp, which you'll be aware used to have 300 people living on it, and now he's just got this house there, which without any running water or electricity, and he goes and spends a month or so a year there. But there was an old lady called the Dotach who once taught how to carry a bag of peat on his back. And he's a mountaineer and he's pretty strong. But the Dotach was thinking he was just a wee lad and didn't have a clue. So she was a feisty old lady. And so when we were putting our stills, our copper stills in place, and we have a gin still, which is separate to the whiskey stills, and we thought it'd be nice to give them a name. He thought, well, we'll name the gin still after the Dotach because our gin still is quite a feisty looking piece of equipment. And so that's nobody knows how to translate the Dotach, by the way. You might, but even my Gaelic speaking colleagues don't know what it actually means.
I think it's got an unwritten meaning in Harris.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, she was a character by all accounts. And my granny was actually born on Scarp. She's from Scarp. And my
Oh,
mum used to go on holiday to Scarp and stay in the Daughter's cottage, which I
wow.
understand is the
Really?
cottage that Burr now owns. So
Ah,
it's
that's
all
incredible. I didn't know that.
it's
That's
all quite
amazing.
yeah,
I'll
and
have to introduce you one day.
that would be
You should
great.
meet him. He'd love to meet you.
But yeah, just talking about having to be so hardy and resilient in those times because you had to get a boat over to Scarp, obviously, and then
Indeed.
from Hoosnish to Avinsui, it was just a dirt track. So
Yeah.
you'd have to walk and carry everything as well. It was
There's a
quite
famous
a
episode
challenge.
of you'll know about the lady who was giving birth to twins.
Yes.
And one stormy night it wasn't going well, and they had to get her off Scarp on the boat, as you say, and then onto the mainland and to Stornoway. And I think she gave birth to one child in Stornoway, and then I think they had to fly her to Inverness for the second one, if I remember rightly. And so these babies were born in two different counties.
Yeah.
And I think that was the end of Scarp. That was the day when they said, "Look, this is not habitable anymore. We can't we can't live like this."
Well, I have it on good authority. She was carried on a door on the boat from Scarp
Right,
to the
right.
main to
Wow,
Harris,
wow. There you go.
and then transported. But they had to get her from there to Avinsui and then get to the ambulance. So yeah, but apparently also when she got to the hospital in Lewis, there was a German there a German man heard all about it, and that's what led to the rocket post.
Of course,
So I don't know if you
of
know about
course.
that, but
I
yeah,
know the story of the rocket post. Absolutely, a German scientist who thought the idea of transporting the post from one island to another with a rocket. But apparently turned out to be a complete scam because what he used to do was sell first edition stamps for these little experiments, make a fortune, and then run off.
oh wow. Stories. It's all about the stories.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Um, and tell me about you've got a croft on Harris as well, don't you?
So the family have just absolutely fallen in love with Harris and the people, and I really felt that this is not just a place of work, and so I thought it really important that I don't just come over as the incomer. Wanted to get more integrated into community life. So yes, we bought a small croft house right down on the southernmost tip of Harris, overlooking North Uist, little village called Borisdale Village, a big word, a hamlet. And yeah, so we've renovated that, and we spend as much time as we can there. We do let it out as a self-catering cottage during the season, but yeah, we live there in the winter, and it's a wonderful escape. In fact, we love it in the winter. We love sitting there in January, watching the weather go past the window at 90 miles an hour, and just enjoying the kind of the climate, if you like. So summers are wonderful, but I think winter's also special.
Yes, definitely. Especially if you're inside watching, I'd
Better,
imagine.
yeah.
And tell me more about your sort of day-to-day life then. I imagine you are extremely busy. There's always must be a lot going on, and you're expanding in so many different markets as well. So how do you manage sort of day-to-day life with sort of winding down and having time off?
I'm not a very good example, Erica. I'm a complete workaholic. I live on adrenaline. I'm really not good at that, the mindfulness piece. But clearly, I'm now getting to the point where I probably do need to manage that, And so I've got a couple of little techniques. I mean, one lovely example is actually going to Harris. I mean, yesterday I went to Harris and took the plane from Edinburgh to Stornoway, and I always like to kind of acclimatize to Harris life a bit. So I have a Royal Enfield motorbike, which I keep at the airport, and the car hire company keeps it in their valeting shed, as you do on the islands. And so I pick the bike up, and then I have a lovely hour's ride, and I'm breathing the island air, often getting the island rain in my face as well. But yesterday was just a picture perfect sunny April morning, and right over the mountains down into Tarbert, where I can then start my day. So I've kind of had that hour of acclimatization from city life in Edinburgh, where I live, to Harris life, and so I walk into the distillery with a different mindset and more of a kind of island mindset. So that's a real treat that I have whenever I commute over to the distillery, which I do every couple of weeks. I guess if I'm working from home, which I do 70 or 80% of the time, what do I do? Well, I've got a couple of little rituals. I have to confess, my 11 o'clock rituals are coffee, not a tea. But even with my coffee, I've now managed to turn that into a wee ritual, because I've got a beautiful tungsten hand grinder, and I measure out my beans very precisely. And I buy my coffees from Artisan Roast in Edinburgh, which are up the road from me. And that takes 2 or 3 minutes to make the coffee, because I've got a special kettle that pours at a certain way at a certain temperature. And so that's my 11 o'clock way of standing up, getting on my feet, going to a different room, opening the door, go out into the garden with my coffee. And I do something again similarly in the afternoon, but that time it's an etiquette tea every afternoon. And as you might know, I'm a loyal customer, so I've got a small range of your teas. And so the choice, is it a second flush Darjeeling, or is it an Earl Grey, or a Tippy Assam? And making the tea, it does good. It does me good. I'll take the tea out into the garden when the weather permits, always. And it's amazing how just the 5-10 minutes will serve to clear the head, and quite often enables me to come up with answers to things that I've been, struggling with perhaps, but staring too much at a laptop or being distracted by the phone. So, can't call that a great mindfulness technique, but it means at least a couple of times a day, I get a chance to, just do something totally different and clear the head.
Well, I think that definitely counts as a mindfulness technique. And yeah, promise I didn't pay you to say that you drink etiquette tea, but that's really good to
But I
hear.
do, that it's not, yeah.
Very good to hear. And yeah, I'm interested to know because the Herrick is quite a recent launch, relatively
Mm.
speaking. So how's it all going?
Yeah, well, the launch was, 18 months ago. And we had always said to people, it'll be ready when it's ready. We're not going to rush it out when it's legally 3 years old. We're going to wait till it actually tastes worthy of the name, the Herach being a native of Harris. And so we took a long time, and then we launched our whiskey, as I say, September 23, and it was unbelievable. It surpassed any expectations we had. So we put 28,000 bottles online when we opened the web shop at 10 o'clock in the morning, thinking probably last us a month or two. And 4.5 hours later, there wasn't a bottle left. So it was flying off the virtual shelf at the rate of about 3 a second, which was incredible. And at the same time, and this was really beautiful, we had the launch at the distillery in Tarbert, and the sun shone on Saturday morning. And I went down to the distillery at 7 o'clock in the morning to sort of check that everything was okay, and couldn't believe my eyes. And I saw at least 200 people standing in line, waiting for the shop to open. And at the front of the shop, at the front of the queue, was Murdo. Now, Murdo Faraja, as he's known, had been at the Cayley the night before, and he was definitely left the Cayley worse for wear at 2 o'clock, which was the time I left the Cayley, clutching a bag of Tennants in a carrier bag. And he was heading off in one direction. I went back to my hotel with my wife, and lo and behold, 7 o'clock in the morning, who was at the front of the queue? Murdo Faraha, still clutching his Tennants. He'd been there all night in the doorway
Wow.
to be the first Herach to buy the Herach. And I just think that's just a beautiful illustration of, the kind of sense of belonging that we've managed to engender, and the pride that the locals have in their distillery, which is, something they've never had before. I mean, they've had Harris Tweed, which is something they are intensely proud of. But this is a new venture, a new thing that makes the people proud to be from the island.
Yes, that's incredible. And I wonder if there were any moments during that time when everyone's waiting for the Herrick to be ready. Was there much sort of pressure to sort of try and speed it up and put it out there? How did you manage to sort of keep that patience?
Well, we started off by choosing the right investors. So when we went out in 2011 to 2012 to seek investment, we knew we had to have the right people backing the business, people with a long-term mindset. Another of our 5 values is the words life takes time. Yeah, and that life take time has two meanings. One is we're in a long-term business. Whiskey should not be rushed. Because quality comes with age. It's very simple. And we have the perfect climate for maturing whiskey in Harris. It is actually scientifically proven to be a perfect environment for maturation of whiskey. So we knew we could make a special whiskey, but we knew we'd need time. And so having the people who would invest behind the business and wouldn't be chasing us for a return in the short term, that was hugely helpful. And I guess that's the foundations, and our bankers, in a similar vein, they understand that this is a long-term business, and that's the foundation for giving us patience. And then then it's about the whole team also understanding that we're in a long-term business, that when we make decisions, we're looking to the future. So it doesn't mean that we don't make quick decisions. We have to also be agile. I always say there's no long term without a short term. So, there's lots of very, very busy people doing a lot of things and making some very quick decisions and using that agility I talked about.
Hmm.
When you go through COVID and you come out the other side, and when you're facing huge headwinds, we are at the moment. This is the toughest period for the whiskey industry in generations. I mean,
Yes.
the toughest I've known in 40 years. So, after that wonderful heady days of that whiskey launch, it's now hard work. It's very hard work. And so we have to adapt, we have to respond, we have to stay steadfast to our values, but we have to also be creative and innovative and do different things.
Yes, and it doesn't seem to be getting any easier.
Mr. Trump applying a 10% tariff for all of our exports to America last night,
Yeah, exactly.
wasn't helpful.
Not helpful at all. But like you say, it's all about adaptability and change, and that's something businesses have had to get very used to,
Yeah.
certainly over the last 5 years, I've just
All
never
of us
known so
have,
much change. Yep.
yourselves included, I'm no doubt.
Yep. Yes, it's been crazy. And I'm curious if you ever trusted your gut instinct on a decision, even when logic and advisors or people were telling you something else? How much does intuition play into your decision making?
Quite a lot. I do try to use a lot of analysis and careful thought and consideration, but I do have a lot of gut instinct on things. And when I said that we have to create a brand here that cuts through the noise of the categories that we're operating in, that also suggests that you really need to break with convention and do things differently. So, we call ourselves a challenger brand, which means we don't really follow consumer trends. We don't really rely very much on consumer research. We kind of know what we stand for, and we then apply that purpose to what we do. So, an example would be this idea of nurturing belonging. So, you'll know that when we launched our gin, we uniquely didn't make it available in any shops in the UK. We only sold direct to consumer. Now, this has never been done before. And for 2 to 3 years, we continued with that. And what that did, firstly, it gave us a wonderful database of consumers. We knew exactly who was buying our gin, how often they were buying it, where they lived. We could engage them with our storytelling. We could romance them with the idea that their bottle was traveling across the Minch and would take a few days to get there, instead of the instant gratification that is the norm these days. And we turned that disadvantage into a benefit. And then we evolved that model into a click and collect business where we had 150 click and collect partners, including one tea shop in Rose Street.
Exactly.
And that was unique, never been done before in the spirits industry. And again, kept this sense of belonging. And there was always this buzz around the Harris gin. How do you get hold of it? We made it really difficult for people to buy, which could have really backfired, because it was really complicated. It took an enormous amount of administration. It really annoyed the retailers most of the time who were working with us on this click and collect thing. But somehow we created this desire, for the gin, and that scarcity created even more desire. So that was one. I think the bottle was another example where I went down to London to meet the best bottle designers in the world, a company called Stranger and Stranger. And I met Ivan, who runs the business, and I said, look, I haven't got any money. I admire what you do so much, and I'd love you to design our whiskey bottle for us. I said, we will also be making a gin, but we can't afford a bespoke bottle for the gin because we need the gin like next year and we don't have any money. And so wonderfully, they flew up to Harris, spent 2 days walking around the island with me on the beach and met the locals and saw some Harris tweed weaving and went back to London. And then they presented to me the Herach bottle. This is 2012 I'm talking about.
Wow.
And the gin bottle. And I said, you've ignored me. You've just designed a gin bottle. I told you I couldn't afford a gin bottle. They said, I don't care. You've got to have this gin bottle. We've designed it. You need it. And again, the cost of developing a bespoke bottle is enormous. You have to go through, to buy tens of thousands to buy molds. The minimum order quantities are colossal. And I just knew when I saw that design that this was going to be something we had to do. So again, logic and the finances said you shouldn't do it. But I'm so pleased that we went against that and dug deep and created the bottle. So I got a couple of examples, I guess.
Wow, that's a great story. I didn't know the detail behind that, and the bottle is just so special. It just really encaptures your brand and your value and the essence of Harris and its people and place. And
Yeah, very
yeah,
pleased, very pleased.
it's incredible. And yeah, I wonder whose idea was it to start to not sell the bottles in shops to start with and to rather start to build your database? How did that come about?
Well, kind of immodestly, it was mine. I wanted to stay close to the consumer. So it's being a kind of a marketeer at heart,
Mhm.
proximity to the consumer, understanding your customer, engaging with your customer. In our business, we always work through distributors. So when you work through a distributor, they take control. They do all the selling. You can help with the marketing, but they will do all the selling, and you don't have that direct connection. You're several steps removed from the consumer. And so I thought, well, A, I can get close to the consumer. B, I can keep all that margin that would be really helpful to us at this early stage, because we can then reinvest that gross profit behind the business. So those were the two main reasons. And then I guess a side benefit, as I mentioned, was this idea of creating this sense of scarcity. We always say Harris is limited. There's only so much Harris to go around. And the mystery and the mystique of buying this small batch gin and now the small batch whiskey from this remote island, I think is something people to love to imagine.
Yes, well, it's definitely paid off. And I think we must also talk about the sugar kelp that goes into the gin,
Mm.
sourced by the wonderful Lewis.
Lewis from Lewis.
Lewis from Lewis, yes.
Absolutely. So the story there, I guess, goes back to, again, for, with, and from Harris. So we're going to create a gin. We're now in 2013. We're actively designing the distillery. We're designing our stills. We're thinking about recipes and what does a gin taste like and how do we make this gin from Harris? As I said, key value for, with, and from Harris. We have the softest water of any distillery in Scotland, because it all flows over that 3 billion-year-old Lewisian gneiss that is the bedrock of the island. We can do that. We can bring the human aspect from Harris. We only employ Harris-born distillers, in our distilling team, so we didn't bring in people from the industry. So what else can we bring from the island that's going to influence the flavor? And actually, Burr's daughter is an agronomist, and one of her best friends is an ethnobotanist. And this ethnobotanist, whose passion is the connection between people and plants, we engaged her for a fortnight, and the two of them cycled around Harris, looking at plants that we might be able to use for the gin. Obviously, gin has to have juniper. There's no juniper growing in Harris, so we're going to have to import a lot of our botanicals, but we wanted something of Harris. And as it happened, Suzanne was a wild swimmer as a hobby. And so that must have engendered this idea that maybe we should look beneath the sea as well as on the land. And so she looked at different types of seaweed and kelp, and she came up with this idea of sugar kelp. So sugar kelp, as its name would suggest, has a kind of umami flavor to it. If you've ever tried it, I'm sure you have,
I have lots
because
of
you,
times,
you
yeah.
you put it in your tea, and it's got this lovely savory, sweet maritime flavor, which gives our Isle of Harris gin a particular saline but also sweetness. And so it was a magic ingredient. And as you say, Lewis goes out only between the months of January and May, when the fronds are at their healthiest, and he harvests beneath the surface and then does it by hand. So the kelp regrows within a matter of weeks. So it's 100% sustainable. And we use small quantities anyway. And then we have them dried. There's a seaweed company up in Stornoway who dry the kelp for us. And then we add it in small quantities to our maceration process when we make the gin.
Yeah, it's an incredible ingredient, and I just love Lewis's whole values and ethics around everything he does as well. And it just, yeah, the two
Yeah,
marry so well.
absolutely. We call him the kelp man.
Yes.
And when you see pictures of him arising from the sea, he's some James Bond villain, in his wetsuit. And wonderful man.
Quite remarkable. But yeah, I'd agree. It really does add something quite special to the taste that you can't
Mm,
quite describe. But yeah, it does bring it back to Harris.
exactly.
And I wonder, you said that the population had been in decline, it had lost sort of 50%. What's it like now? What's happening in Harris and the economy?
Yeah, I mean, statistically, it's too early to say, really. I'm not sure that it's risen significantly. partly constraints now become housing. So we're actually now the biggest employer on the island. But there are limits to how much you can grow employment because the housing's needed and there are projects afoot to create more housing. But that's a constraint. What I am intensely proud of is that a lot of our team are now very young. So what we have managed to do is take people who have left school, who were not really keen on leaving the island. A lot of them are real home birds. They love being in Harris. It's quite unusual. Most teenagers, I know I was, I wanted to get the hell out as soon as I could, and go somewhere more exciting. But the Herach are often very much want to stay at home. And so we've managed to recruit people who've left school. We work very closely with the local schools in Tarbert, take school leavers, and then turn them into whatever they want to turn into. So some lovely examples. Ryan was our first 16-year-old, no idea what he wanted to do, answered the phones for us for the first year, got inspired by marketing, went off to Glasgow, did a diploma in business studies, came back to us as a brand ambassador in the west of Scotland, and literally last week moved to Chiswick in London to run our English business. So there's a lovely example. Then there's Rebecca, who age 16 was making soup in the kitchen. We used to make 2 homemade soups every day in the canteen. And she applied to be the first ever Hebridean distiller apprentice. And she's done her apprenticeship and she's now a fully fledged distiller. So she is now creating the gin and the whiskey, age 23. In fact, 4 of our 5 distillers are under the age of 25. So I've got lots of examples and what I love is the buzz that is around the place of young people with new ideas, and I think that probably gives me more satisfaction than anything.
Yeah, it's incredible how you've shaped people's lives and really sort of transformed the area as well. It's quite remarkable.
Hmm.
And I wonder if there must be sort of days when it is quite difficult and there's so much going on. Is there
Mm.
anything you could share, any sort of words of wisdom that you return to on those difficult days?
Yeah, yes. I mean, there are very stressful moments and very difficult moments. Sometimes it's not all plain sailing. I guess for me personally, I do 2 things. I used to work with an executive coach back in the old days, and she's a lovely lady. She's also a Buddhist monk, and but coaches some senior executives on a number of boards. And she taught me quite a lot about resilience. And the foundations for me would be what she would call, I would call grounding. So, and the grounding, very simplistically for me, is literally grounding, putting my feet on the ground, feeling my feet on the ground, and reminding myself of some special moments where I feel very proud, very pleased with what I've achieved. And it is very personal, but it lifts the spirit and it says, yeah, in a moment where you have self-doubt, which I'm sure we all do, it kind of gives you that inner strength. You say, right, no, actually, I remember that moment, which was a fantastic success. And that is a kind of starting point, if you like. And then I guess the resilience piece, I mean, there's so much to this, but one thing I also remember from Claire was the idea of a willow, and the willow being the strength of the willow being its ability to bend in the storm.
Mm.
And tends not to break in the storm. So that's about adaptability and not necessarily having to, you've got to stay steadfast. You've got to stick to your values, your purpose. So it's not about just swinging with the wind, and changing direction, but it is about being flexible and being adaptable. And another lovely phrase she used to say to me is, what's the juice in it for you? So when times are tough, you think, hang on, what can I get out of this? There's some things I can influence and some things I can't influence, but where's the juice in this for me? And that's actually really quite powerful as well. So you think, no, it's fine because I'm going to learn something from this, or I'm going to adapt, or there's going to be some benefit coming out of this. Change generally is good, not always, but generally you can get something good out of change. So that would be one thing. The other thing is my wife, Alison. So, she's my mentor. She's very clever. She's very strategic. She's a great people person. And so when I'm wrestling with things, then generally we'll sit down over a cup of etiquette tea, of course, and discuss things. And I think I'm so fortunate to have that person, if you like, at my side to help me with getting through some of the more difficult times.
Yep, I hear that. Yep, I don't know where I'd be without my other half to sort of share the burden and to have listened
Yeah,
to things and
yeah,
a
very
sounding
lucky,
board for things,
very
definitely.
lucky.
And I love the idea of a willow. We use in etiquette and the tea mind, we work with the Chinese five elements, so that sort of relates to the wood element. So
Okay.
it's a bit like the whether it's a willow or a tree, so it's having really deep roots, deep foundations, which are your values that are they never
Mm,
change, they just get
mm.
stronger and build with time. But then as you grow, you kind of bend and flex and adapt to things with change, but you never
So,
break. So it's
right,
a really good
absolutely. Same.
analogy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, isn't it?
And I love the idea of coupling that with grounding yourself. So sort of imagining
Mm.
yourself as a willow and just being rooted to the earth. And yeah, I'm going to use that in my tea routines
Right,
this
fantastic.
week. And just remembering moments where you're really proud or just happy moments as well.
Mm.
Just to
Absolutely.
it's amazing the power of our mind that can really sort of change our trajectory of our day as well.
Indeed.
So I just wonder, there's people connect so strongly with your brand. What's been the most surprising thing about how people have connected with it emotionally?
Mm. I guess it's when you hear people say love, the word love. I mean, people don't love brands, but you hear people say, I love Harry's Gin, and I think that is, when I'm looking for proof that we're doing things right, it's that emotional connection, and I talked about, in marketing, you've got rational reasons to buy something, and then you've got emotional reasons to buy things. And again, from a very functional perspective, the more emotional reasons to buy, the more people will generally pay, the more value they put on something. You move from commodity to luxury effectively, and we're in a luxury business. It's purely discretionary. So having that emotional connection, again, in financial terms, means we can charge a premium price. And I guess another example of where I've been surprised is a couple of years ago we had to put our price up. We've got excise duties had gone up, costs had gone up. We had to put our prices up by almost 10%. We hadn't done so for 2 years. We were very nervous about it. One of our values is honest, straight, and true. So, it's all about transparency and integrity. And so we thought, right, we're going to tell everybody. We're not going to hide it. We're going to go out and we'll tell all of our database. We have 50,000 people we write to every Friday afternoon. And we'll tell them that we're putting our price up. And the response was astonishing. We probably got 500 responses, every single one of which was saying, it's rich. You need to do this. This is right. You need to survive. It's worth every penny. And you're doing some great stuff over there on Harris. We support you, and no worries. And it was so gratifying. I'm not saying that's going to happen every time, but I think that was a lovely example of how we'd got so much goodwill from our customers that they were able to positively accept a substantial price increase.
And how does that make you feel personally when you hear stories like that and feedback like that and just
Yeah,
everything that you've achieved?
yes. I mean, very proud, very proud. And listen, we get so many things wrong, though, Erica. I fear that people are going to listen to this story and think, "Oh, it's just this dream business and everything's always wonderful." But we get so many things wrong, and I get so many things wrong. But I think at the end of the day, this is my swan song, if you like, career wise, and I will feel incredibly proud, I think, when I head off and with my dram of the Herach in hand, and feel that hopefully I've created something sustainable, something that these islanders can feel proud of, something that will last for a long time. It's not many people get that opportunity in their lives to do something like that.
Yeah, no, it's really incredible. And I think the way that you've led the business as well and instilled the values from the ground up, I think is remarkable and is going to, yeah, just keep the business and Harris standing in good stead for a long time to come.
I do hope so.
And do you have any, like, you must have a sort of 5 year or 10 year vision for the business. What sort of things have you got in store that you can share with us?
Well, as I said earlier, we are navigating serious headwinds now. So the projections that we had in place 2 years ago are out of the window. And now we are working very hard and adapting and learning in an environment which is brutally tough. And so going forward, it's really the fundamentals that we have to get right. It's establishing our whiskey and our gin in global markets. So there are 25 countries that we sell to, in a way that these brands have that traction that we've managed to achieve in the UK, in Scotland particularly. We want to see that in key global markets as well. And once you get traction and repeat business and that degree of loyalty from the trade, from the consumer, then you can start to feel that the job is almost done, or the first phase or the second phase of the job is done, and then you start returning money to your investors, which is absolutely crucial. They've been very patient for over a decade now. So that's a key aim, is to return some money to our supportive investors. And I think it's all about leaving something that's sustainable. So strong brands are a big part of sustainability. Internal resilience. So resilience meaning not too much key person dependency, having the plant, the equipment, everything else in place, our standards, our policies, our processes. That's all part of resilience and and sustainability as well. So all of these things are the bedrocks to enabling something to last the test of time, which was the original vision that I mentioned at the beginning.
Yes, well, it's just been so inspiring just to hear about your journey. And I guess there's so much more that we could cover in this conversation, but I'm conscious of time. But yeah, just from everything that you've shared from your whole journey and Johnny Walker and Diageo, going to Switzerland, Glenmorangie, and then all your work with the Isle of Harris Distillers, just and I'm really grateful to you as well for taking a chance on me and on etiquette for helping us create a tea to accompany the Isle of Harris gin. And not many people would sort of be as open to that possibility as you. So I think that shows a lot as well about why you've been so successful and how you've managed to lead the distillery as well onto such great strengths. And I love what you said near the beginning as well about life taking time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something really key about that, especially in the drinks business where things do take time to happen and time to mature. And just when running a business or trying to achieve anything in life, we can often be quite sort of on a treadmill and really impatient and never feeling like we're getting it or nothing's good enough or I'll be happy when. But
Yeah,
actually that is life, isn't it? And it's
it
all about
is.
taking that time and creating these little moments right now
Yeah,
where we can appreciate and feel proud and be happy with what's happening right now.
it's very
Yeah,
important, isn't it? Yeah,
indeed.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, if there was one small thing that you could suggest to our listeners for someone to try while they're brewing their tea maybe this week, something that might bring them a little more meaning or clarity to their day. You've mentioned a few things already, so what do you think would be one thing
Mm.
that you'd really recommend?
I guess I'd have to repeat myself, I think, which is that grounding technique, that, because I will do that. I'll be sitting at my desk and it'll be a lot. And, I might worry, I might be stressed, I might be finding it difficult to make decisions. And I think then that 5 minute, 10-minute time where you have to do something completely different. You leave the phone, you leave the computer, you go, if you're working from home, you go into the other room, you make that cup of tea or that cup of coffee, and you take your time over it and do it well, and do it properly. It's not about throwing a tea bag or an instant spoon of coffee into the mug. It isn't that. That's not going to help. So you do something that does have a ritual attached to it, and then take it outside and walk around and enjoy, and then allow your mind to perhaps drift or clarify. But that grounding bit, maybe if you're having that self-doubt moment, that start with that. Remind yourself that you are actually a really good person. You are successful, you are loved, you are, you should be proud of yourself in and having a concrete example, because just saying it generically I don't think is actually that helpful. But always coming back to maybe one example that you're so happy about, or one person, or whatever. And then I think things then clarify and become easier. Weight lifts, the adrenaline stops pumping. So that would be the one thing I think probably that I've learned that really helps me anyway.
Well, you've just perfectly encapsulated what the tea mind is all about. So thank you so much for that. And I'm definitely going to use that as my tea routine going forward. And I think when you do it day in, day out as well, using the same examples and getting a real image, making it as real and as clear as possible in your mind, it really does help to rewire your brain and make your day a little bit better, which is what we're trying to do here. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for
No, you're
sharing that.
welcome. Really
And
enjoyed our chat, Eric, and
yes,
we'll
it's been
see.
great. Look forward to catching up with you again soon and
Absolutely.
enjoying a wee dram. Thank
Absolutely.
you
That
so
would be
much.
lovely. All right. You take care.
Thanks now.
Bye.
Thanks for sharing this cup of calm with me. As you move through your day, take the tea mind with you. Pause when you can, breathe, and be kind to yourself. And please follow the Tea Mind to get new episodes as they land on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay present, sip slowly, and thanks for listening.